an issue going on in the country right now. People think, boom, 7 o'clock hits. These are all the votes. They're tallied. It takes time to get all of these votes certified. We saw it in the 2020 election. Sometimes it takes weeks to get every vote counted. Now, coming into this, Trump was projected to win by decent margins, 30 points in most of the polls. Now, they just showed a few things here on the screen where Nikki Haley, it appears that she has won Charleston County by almost getting 60% of the vote here, and people here are just cheering as they watch that margin of victory right now for Trump kind of going a little in the different direction, getting closer. A lot of those votes coming in still this evening. Again, Haley's expected to take the stage around 8 o'clock tonight. We'll get a better understanding of that margin of victory as more votes continue to get counted here tonight. But they're not accepting defeat. Nikki Haley has said earlier on today she plans on heading to Michigan and she plans on getting over into Super Tuesday. She wants everyone to have an option when it comes to going to those polls. And like we have here in Charleston tonight, we know that the fight is still not going to be given up. We are not expecting to hear anything from her in terms of conceding to the former president. But we'll have that full report when she takes the stage here tonight at 8 o'clock. But for now, we're live in Charleston. Ian Klein, WMBF News.
All right, Ian, we will check back with you in a bit. Let's bring it home now to Horry County, where thousands of you headed to the polls to vote in today's primary.
And we do know that there was some frustration for folks when it comes to which precinct they were supposed to go to. Some precincts had been combined. That was an issue certainly for the Democratic primary. Some issues dealing with some issues as well today. Our Ali Espinosa joins us now in Cherry Grove at one of the precincts.
So, Ali, why did some people end up at the wrong precinct?
Yeah, Eric and Rachel, there has been some confusion amongst voters since Horry County changed their polling locations just temporarily. Now, Horry County made those changes around 2 months ago. The county combined their precincts for the Democratic and GOP primaries. Those changes were made at the direction of Democratic and Republican parties and the State Election Commission. County officials say they made the changes around 2 months ago, now reminding voters to verify their polling locations before heading out to vote. Now, we did receive several complaints from voters earlier this month of these changes and signs posted at polling locations.
The signs weren't really clear here at the community church. So I first went to the elementary one, was told to come back here. Well, the reason the signs weren't clear was because they weren't facing the main road.
Again, these changes are temporary and polling locations are supposed to go back to normal for the June primaries. For now, live in North Myrtle Beach, Ali Espinosa, WMBF News.
All right, and then right now we want to go ahead and bring in our political analyst, Justin Vaughn, Associate Professor of Political Science at Coastal Carolina University.
And first question for you, Justin, appreciate you being here. Are you surprised by this quick call by the Associated Press? You know, as we heard Ian said, a lot of counting has to take place. This is so preliminary. They called it just a couple minutes after the polls closed.
I am surprised. It wasn't a surprise that President Trump was going to win the state, but there was a lot of speculation that Governor Haley could outperform polling, which if she outperformed it by several points, could have made it for a close call. So the fact that right out of the gate, the AP went to call it for President Trump was pretty significant.
Yeah, I thought it was quite interesting because we were speaking earlier today, and I personally was also surprised that it happened so early because I think we were expecting things to take a little bit less time with the Democratic primary than it did, and really it was the flip. I mean, it was just moments after polls closed today. We got that very quick reaction. So
let's assume that the Associated Press got it right and Trump will be declared the winner. 4 times in the past, presidents have lost to their home state and yet still won the election. Do you think that could be the case with Haley?
I don't think that that's going to be the case here. And that's because this is not a situation where Trump is likely to stumble and be alienated with a large percentage of the voters. He's very, very popular with his party around the country. And so Governor Haley having an insurgent response going forward is unlikely to happen.
Yeah. And then a lot of people now, we did, many of us expected based on the polling that Donald Trump would win here, but Nikki Haley has said, what's the rush? I'm not going to quit yet. She's going to continue pushing forward at least until Super Tuesday. But for a lot of people, you have to wonder, what's the end game? So what do you think, her goal is with this, knowing the odds certainly are stacked against her?
Yeah, there are any number of explanations, and I think is going to be the chatter on the morning shows tomorrow and all through next week. I think that we'll see people take her argument seriously, that more voices need to be heard during a primary. That's the argument that other insurgent candidates in the Democratic Party have been making on why they're people like Dean Phillips are challenging President Biden. I think that you'll have people wondering if this is going to position her for 2028, if this is going to potentially position her for an opportunity to be there waiting in the wings in case President Trump and his legal woes sideline him. And then I think it's not unheard of to consider the idea that she may still be positioning herself for a running mate position. It would seem unlikely, given.
It'd be interesting, given some of the discourse back and forth.
Yeah, she's certainly sharpened her attacks over the last few weeks here in South Carolina, but he just recently mentioned Ron DeSantis as a potential running mate, and DeSantis was no shrinking violet about that either.
And we have to point out that Nikki Haley was not an overwhelmingly popular, according to many people, governor when she was our governor here in South Carolina. So with that in mind, do you think that if she doesn't win the home state, that could also be the fact that maybe she doesn't have as many supporters right here in the state because of the fact that she ran for so long as our governor, and many people were not pleased?
That's possible. You could imagine a scenario where a different candidate may have had more success against President Trump. I think that's an unlikely scenario. I think that Senator Scott didn't have that kind of success against him either. So I think anybody, regardless of popularity, would have been up against a really difficult challenge, and Governor Haley did about as well as she or anyone else probably was going to be able to.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear from her when she speaks at some point later on tonight to hear what her response is going to be.
And you bet it'll be soon. Yeah, we're going to be hearing a lot more from you, Justin Vaughn. Appreciate you being here. We are just beginning with you, so keep it right here. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah, that's right. The Republican presidential primary began on January 15th with the Iowa caucuses, followed, of course, by New Hampshire and Nevada.
Yeah, and, of course, South Carolina's primary happening right now, but there are still a handful of states to cast those primary ballots before Super Tuesday.
Yeah, that's right. 15 states going to be at stake that day, meaning there's still a lot of delegates at stake. WMBF News anchor Erica Edwards shows us where the count stands now and what is still up for grabs. Erica.
Yes. Okay. The number that you need to keep in mind is 1,215. That is the minimum number of delegates needed out of the total 2,429 to win the Republican nomination. Okay, so let's take a look at where we are right now. Like Eric and Rachel mentioned, 3 states, including the U.S. Virgin Islands, have already caucused. You can see them right here in yellow, leaving the states in red, including us right here in South Carolina, to hold primaries between now and Super Tuesday, which, believe it or not, is just 10 days away on March 5th. Now, the states in green, all these guys right here, they will all vote on Super Tuesday. So what does that mean for our delegates? So far, with Trump's projected win of South Carolina, 136 delegates have been awarded so far, and there are still 189 up for grabs before Super Tuesday, and then there are 847 delegates at stake on Super Tuesday, which means after March 5th, 1,178 delegates will already be decided, and there will be 1,251 left. So even with Super Tuesday, more than half of the delegates are still up for grabs. Now, do you remember that number I mentioned earlier? 1,215, well, there are at least that many delegates remaining after March 5th. So let's take a look at where the candidates are right now. Now, former President Donald Trump has been the GOP frontrunner so far with 107 delegates, picking up 50 tonight from South Carolina with his projected win. Now, he still needs 1,108 to secure that nomination. And Nikki Haley, just 17 delegates so far, needs 1,198 to win the spot. But with more than 1,200 left, even after Super Tuesday, this is likely why Haley has not said she's dropping out of the race just yet. Now, of course, only time will tell. In the studio, back to you.
Right, again, our news anchor Erica Edwards showing us where the count stands right now. Again, now Donald Trump picking up 50 delegates tonight here in South Carolina, added that to his 107 he had coming into today.
And let's talk about those delegates. We're bringing back Justin Vaughn with us now, political analyst. In light of the fact that there are still so many outstanding delegates, do you think it is a smart decision for Nikki Haley to continue the fight?
It's not a dumb decision. It makes sense that even after Super Tuesday, there are still an extraordinary number of delegates to amass. And in the event that President Trump is unable to be the candidate come November, being the one campaign in operation with a fully institutionalized effort could put her in a position to be successful.
I mean, and there certainly has not been much slowing with her fundraising, too. I mean, in January, she raised more money than Trump's campaign did, so she's certainly being fueled quite a bit there. Do you see that kind of slowing down, especially after her performance tonight here in South Carolina?
I think that her supporters who have been giving her dollars, both small dollar donors and large dollar donors, are not going to be any more excited about a Trump campaign than they were before. So she can probably continue to raise money, but she'll need to, because running on Super Tuesday or post Super Tuesday is extraordinarily expensive.
We are taking a live look right now at Nikki Haley's camp there in Charleston, where our reporter Ian Klein is standing by, bringing us live reports. And you said earlier, Justin, that there could be a potential that she could possibly be a running mate, and that may be the reason why she's keeping up that fight. Let's talk about potential running mates should Trump win this primary.
Yeah, and President Trump knows that there is a lot of attention on who his running mate is going to be, and he is certainly kind of playing with that. He recently confirmed that there were several names that were on his list, some not surprising, some maybe surprising. Mm-hmm. You have our own Senator Tim Scott is one of the people who has been identified as potential running mate, and we saw him speak on the podium with President Trump tonight when he declared victory here in South Carolina. You also have Governor DeSantis of Florida,
Which, was that a bit surprising, do you think? Because, he did have some pretty strong words, when he was
like
still in the race himself. I mean, but some more than others.
Sure.
I would, specifically, DeSantis, Nikki Haley had stronger words than, say, a Vivek Ramaswamy did. Certainly a Tim Scott did as well.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a surprise, and it would be a big surprise in a normal political situation. But this is also President Trump, and nothing is ever exactly what you would expect. And if we remember last time when he ran and won the nomination, or the first time he won the nomination, he entertained, the role of many of his critics as cabinet secretaries, as running mates. He had that kind of infamous dinner with Mitt Romney, who had been very, very critical of him. And so President Trump seems at least always willing to allow people to come back, kiss the ring, and maybe make up. And I think the most important thing for him is to win. And if Nikki Haley is the best person who's going to help him get over the finish line in the fall, and I don't think he would allow a few harsh words here in South Carolina to hold him back.
So you think that she's not too far over the threshold where there's no coming back yet?
There are crazier things that could happen.
Let's
certainly
talk about at least one of the elephants in the room. The truth is, should Trump win this primary, the Supreme Court has not ruled yet whether he is even eligible to run a second term due to his conduct January 6th of 2021. What would happen if they ruled that he was not eligible?
That's a great question. And, I wish I had gone to law school because I would have a much more informed opinion about it than I do. But I don't know.
Do we bring back Haley? Do we start over again?
I wouldn't imagine that President Trump would just say, oh, okay, I guess I'm not running anymore. I imagine he would continue to run, and then there would be, the only thing I know for sure would happen is a lot of lawyers in a lot of states would make a lot of money testing ballot access issues.
Yeah, I mean, as we already saw with Colorado, it's
right.
Not cheap there, certainly wouldn't be cheap elsewhere too. But also one other thing that is of note, there was so much polling and so much data coming out saying that Nikki Haley would actually have a better shot against Joe Biden in a general election than Donald Trump would. So why hasn't that been more of a factor, do you think, when it comes to Nikki Haley in all of these primaries?
Sure. I think that if voters were looking at a bunch of equally unknown or moderately known candidates, and they were just kind of sifting through who their choices were, then that electability argument could be more compelling. I still think the ideological argument is more compelling to primary voters. But even with that idea, you have a situation where Haley is just running up against a extraordinarily popular person in the party, and there's very little that electability is going to do to sway whether or not people are already going to stay with President Trump.
Do you think the independent voter at this point could play any factor at all?
Potentially in the fall, and I think in some of the very competitive battleground states it could, if we have a situation where there's a Donald Trump campaign, there's a Joe Biden campaign, there's a RFK or some other third-party campaign that's getting a handful of percentage points, and then 1 or 2 points go either way with an independent voter who maybe isn't in love with any of these candidates, and in a state like Michigan where anything could happen, and who knows.
And you also cannot ignore the fact that we are open here in South Carolina, and I've had some talk even today of people saying, I am a Democrat, but I am going to vote Republican because I'm going to vote for Haley just so that Trump doesn't get in.
Yeah, we talked about that a bit earlier, didn't we, too? That was been a lot of talk as well from Trump's campaign, too, of concern about that. Mm-hmm. So how much of a factor do you think that actually has played? Yeah,
so that's kind of a perennial myth, I think, out there, that there's this quote unquote crossover voter who will come and play in the other party's primary just to be a bit of a spoiler role. I think it very rarely happens. It even more rarely makes an impact. But the fear of it is, kind of triggers this feeling of unfairness by partisans to say, hey, I'm a member of this party. I should be able to choose my nominee. You shouldn't come in and choose one for me, right? And it leads to states like South Carolina right now considering changing the rules about whether or not they'll allow people to choose the party primary that they vote in.
Yeah. All right, a lot of great insight. Appreciate you being with us tonight, Justin. Thank you. We'll be checking back with you in a bit. Now, WMBF News also took a look at the campaign finances, and anchor Erica Edwards breaks down the percentage of funds coming from South Carolinians. Tell us more, Erica.
Yeah, absolutely. So we looked at a little bit of some summary data that you maybe mentioned earlier today. So they show President Biden actually came in with about $56 million in cash, and that's up from $46 million in December. So that's really interesting. But then meanwhile, Donald Trump's cash holdings fell to only $30 million, and that is a drop from roughly $33 million from the month before. Now, of course, this is a GOP primary, so let's take a look at the finances for the two candidates that were on the ballot today. WMBF News analyzed data from the Federal Elections Commission and looked at just individual contribution receipts between January and December of last year, and we found that Donald Trump, he spent $59.5 million, with about $1 million of that, you can see it right here, coming from South Carolinians. Nikki Haley, she brought in $12.9 million, and about $1.5 million were from South Carolina donors, or about 11.5%. Now that certainly is a larger percentage, but as we know, this is her home state. Okay, we also analyzed how much money the candidates and political action committees spent on television advertising. We looked at NBC, ABC, and CBS stations right here in Myrtle Beach, and we found Trump, Haley, and two PACs, American for Prosperity Action and the SFA Fund, spent around $846,000 on advertising in January and February. Now, Haley, right here, she spent nearly $315,000, or about a third of the total amount. And Trump just spent about roughly $50,000 or so, about 6% of the total. And then you have the two PAC, American for Prosperity Action. You can see right here is endorsing Haley as their candidate, and they spent $187,000. And then the SFA Fund, who was also backing Haley, spent about $29,000, $292,000. And Eric and Rachel, you have our political analyst with you in the studio. So what does this kind of spending indicate about the different campaigns?
Well, let's find out, Erica. Here he is. Here's Justin Vaughn.
Ordinarily, if I saw one candidate spending a lot of money and a lot more money being spent on behalf of that candidate, I would say that candidate's been doing a really good job fundraising, that candidate has the energy in the electorate. Not the case here. I think what that tells me is two things. One, that Nikki Haley took South Carolina very seriously and spent accordingly. And two, that President Trump was very confident about what was going to happen here. And so he didn't spend a lot of money. He did, however, spend a fair amount of his most precious resource, which is his time. He stumped around the state quite a bit for an incumbent president.
He was right here, just a week or so ago.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And so he didn't blow the state off, but he not
nearly as much as Haley was here, though.
That's right. But I think President Trump campaigned, like we discussed earlier, like an incumbent, and he is for the party. And Governor Haley campaigned like a challenger, even though it's her own state. She took nothing for granted. She did a kind of barnstorming tour, spent a lot of money on media. President Trump, in terms of the allocation of his time, clearly took the state seriously, but also knew they could keep their financial powder dry and spend that elsewhere.
Okay. I know we are waiting to hear from Nikki Haley's camp, and we will go to that live just as soon as we find out that she is speaking. In the meantime, we can continue to sit here and talk with you. Let's talk about the fact that Nikki Haley has spent so much money, and she is taking this so seriously. Do you think, again, that that is an indication that should she lose the primary, we haven't heard the last from Nikki Haley?
We definitely have not heard the last from Nikki Haley. She has established herself as a major player in the Republican Party, which she already was several years ago, but that by being the last candidate standing between President Trump and the nomination, she's grown in national notoriety. And while there may be some bruised feelings on some of the strongest Trump partisans about some of her sharper critiques of President Trump, those memories are often short, and in 4 years or 8 years, she'll still be kind of prime political age and ready to kind of capitalize on everything she's accomplished.
Yeah, I mean, because so much of the conversation, in this cycle has been about the ages, Joe Biden, even Donald Trump too, and then Nikki Haley, she does have that youth factor certainly playing into her favor for the future.
That's right. And even in 4 or 8 years, she'll still be considerably younger than President Trump or President Biden are now.
And then in this cycle here, her campaign team hasn't really been able to pinpoint or will not come out and say any particular states that they are confident that she can win. Is it looking like any states would be more promising to her at this point from the data that you've seen so far?
I wouldn't think so. I would think that if any state was promising, it would have been this state, South Carolina.
Do you think, obviously, Donald Trump is a very polarizing candidate. I mean, you either love him or you don't love him.
Right, there's no in between.
What do you think is the reason why he is faring so well at this point? Do you think it's because she is new? Do you think it's because she is young? Because Donald Trump has a previous track record? I mean, what do you think is the reason why the AP is calling it so early?
Yeah, I think that this campaign is only one thing, and it's a referendum on President Trump. 100% name ID, not universally beloved by Republican voters, but very much so. And so whether it's candidate is Nikki Haley or anybody else, there's just not a lot of room to grow when the campaign is a referendum on Trump. And she made it even more of a referendum on Trump when she sharpened her attacks on him in the last few weeks. And so it's not, voters aren't choosing, do I like this moderate person or this conservative person? Do I like this person who's got a pro-life agenda versus a person who's got a pro-business agenda? They're choosing, how do I feel about President Trump? And if the answer is, I like him, there's nowhere else to even look. If the answer is, I don't like him, well, they're probably voting for Nikki Haley. There just aren't very many Republicans, or not nearly enough Republicans to win the nomination when that's the case.
Yeah.
I had pointed out earlier that some reports had said that Nikki Haley was not particularly an overwhelmingly popular governor. She was not a traditional Republican in many respects. She did, however, one way she bucked the system was bringing down the Confederate flag here in South Carolina. But do you think that here in South Carolina, with these early indications, do you think that her term as governor helped her or hurt her as she runs for president?
If nothing, it certainly helped her. It helped build name ID. It helped take her from a candidate that maybe people kind of knew the name of to someone that they could visualize. The most important thing in politics is to have name ID. Mm-hmm. People have to know who you are. They can't like you if they don't know you. And so by that time as governor, she was an established brand here in South Carolina.
Yeah, interesting. And then when it comes to her campaign here, as she's looking forward, do you really think that that she could kind of find any kind of comeback at this point in any of these states, and any kind of support, do you think?
I don't think there's any comeback if President Trump still remains a standard bearer. Mm-hmm. He's going to continue to win at least this big in every remaining state, and probably, nationally he's been up over Governor Haley by 50 points. There's only 25, 30, 35 here. So he'll have larger victories on Super Tuesday, and as it becomes increasingly more complicated, increasingly more expensive to compete on Super Tuesday and beyond, I don't see a situation where if Trump is still in the race, that anybody comes back. Governor Haley probably has the best chance of anybody, but it's still, quite remote.
Yeah.
Earlier we talked about potential running mates. Do you have any personal predictions or personal picks that you think he would go with at this point? Just assuming that he wins this point.
Even though we do have quite a while still, but at least at this point, I know it could change quite a bit.
Yeah, the person who I find the most interesting, I could see Trump gravitating to is Governor Nome from South Dakota. She has a real kind of conservative charisma and energy that I think he appreciates. President Trump is known to watch television and commend people who perform well on television, who have that kind of energy and appeal that translates well through this medium, and she's very, very good at that. So I wouldn't be surprised if I don't know, if I was playing Vegas and putting odds, I would probably have pretty good odds on her. Senator Scott from South Carolina, I think, is also a pretty interesting candidate.
He's been very visible lately. Yes. Many appearances, you'll see Donald Trump at the podium, and then you'll see Tim Scott right behind him.
That's right.
Right over his shoulder.
That's right. And those appearances tell you two things. One, that Senator Scott was willing to be there, and two, that the Trump team was willing to have him there. And so there's obviously mutual interest. I would be shocked if Senator Scott is not involved in the Trump administration in some way. He's already said he's not running for re-election. So whether that makes him running mate, it remains to be seen. It's not totally clear to me exactly what President Trump wants in a running mate. Mike Pence, it was not a gifted campaigner, but he was strong with kind of the ideological conservative faction that's particularly concerned with evangelical issues. Trump by now has completely won over that segment of the GOP electorate, and so I think whichever candidate resonates the most with the thing that President Trump cares about when the time comes to make the decision is a candidate who'll get it. I think it might be Kristi Noem just because of that kind of media savvy, but Ron DeSantis would probably surprise me a little. Tim Scott wouldn't surprise me at all. Ramaswamy wouldn't really surprise me. I think that Trump likes his energy and his
he's got that youth factor too.
He's got the youth factor, and he's been a very loyal supporter, even when he was in the race. It's hard to get him to say a cross word about the president.
So would it surprise you if he did go with someone else? Would it surprise you if Nikki Haley had any part of his campaign still, and part of his team?
No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't surprise me because, first of all, if she has strengths that he can take advantage of, he might as well. And that if she wants to continue to be a major player in the Republican Party, it would make sense to unify with the campaign.
All right, a lot of projections here. Right now, we are expecting Nikki Haley to take the podium any moment there in Charleston. Oh, not just yet, so we will check back. Just a reminder, though, for you, we do have Ian Klein standing by in Charleston. He'll be bringing us live reports here online and on the air. Don't forget about WMBF News at 11 o'clock when we will wrap all things up for you. We also have Julia Richardson standing by in Columbia. She is covering the Trump camp there as well.
Yeah, and then while we're waiting for Nikki Haley to take the stage here, we do want to continue our conversation here with Justin Vaughn, our political analyst. And I had a question here, kind of getting back to the Trump versus Haley thing. We were talking earlier, and we've mentioned it again here in this conversation, that really, you're saying today was about the referendum, for Trump. You're picking one or the other. But when it comes to the actual issues, too, there are still some differences. So what are the main things where you think that they are kind of at odds when it comes to the issues? What are the main things there that if someone was voting based on those issues, what are the big differentiating factors here between these two options?
Sure. One of the most important things that we've seen be a campaign issue in the last few weeks concerns, I think, very different foreign policy visions. President Trump has always had that America first idea, kind of focus on solving problems here at home, let the rest of the world deal with the things that are happening in their respective sandboxes. That's at odds with most of the American foreign policy establishment. Governor Haley's foreign policy is more traditional kind of Republican foreign policy, where we have a bold presence abroad, where we're active participants in organizations such as NATO. It's a institution that President Trump has had some ambivalence about over the years. And so I think that one of the most significant differences that we would probably see between Trump second term and a Haley administration would probably be our role in the world, and how aggressive the United States the positions that we took in different conflicts that maybe were regional, right? Whether we're talking about things happening in the Middle East, whether we're talking about Russia, Ukraine, whether we're talking about human rights issues taking place in places like Saudi Arabia or China.
Do you fear that should Donald Trump become our next president of the United States, that there would be a retaliation factor, that he would be kind of going on a rampage of getting back those who sort of crossed him? Right now we have the Supreme Court weighing decisions on his future of eligibility, and he put many of those people on the Supreme Court. I mean, if people upset him, do you fear there will be some type of retaliation for him?
There's always a chance for political retaliation, and I think that that happens when people win elections. It's often subtle. It's often behind closed doors. I don't think anything would be subtle or behind closed doors of President Trump. On the other hand, we have robust institutions of governance and laws in this country. So the kind of retaliation, I think, makes some people very nervous, is putting journalists in jail, for example, or imprisoning political opponents. I personally find that unlikely to happen. I think it's concerning that it's even spoken about, but I think it's unlikely to happen just because presidents don't have the power to do those kinds of things.
What about the differences in the two, Nikki Haley and Donald Trump, their campaign strategies? Did you see a marked difference in the way they campaign?
Yeah, so Haley definitely took the traditional route of, hitting lots of different cities, traveling by bus.
Doing the big bad bus tour, right.
Exactly,
Yeah.
doing the big bad bus tour. Lots of, newsletters highlighting different events that were taking place, doing the traditional kind of, kiss the babies and shake the hands and be seen as much as possible. Lots of flexing the flesh. And also, as we spoke about a little while ago, a very robust media campaign and political action committee support that kind of came in over the top of that. And so very traditional effort by a well-organized campaign that was seeking to contest a state. President Trump's campaign was different from that for sure. It was more in keeping with a candidate who is the incumbent in the party, who already has 100% name ID, who has a large degree of loyalty and affection among the party voters, who doesn't need to spend that kind of money or to make those kinds of stops. Also, making those kinds of stops when you have a contingent like the president has to travel with, and the Secret Service, and all of the advanced work that needs to be done is not easy and takes extraordinary kind of organization. And if you don't need to do it, you're probably not going to do it. And so President Trump came. He did his handful of big rallies. Similar to what we've seen him do in previous elections, but he didn't take that kind of day in, day out, kind of pound the ground approach that Governor Haley took and that most candidates would take in a contested primary.
Yeah, I was going to say, you said it's almost like, he feels like the incumbent, not just for the party, but some of these trips, it was like the incumbent president was arriving. I mean, he's got the plane, he's got the whole rollout. It feels like, he's presenting himself as, like I am the one, already, as if he's already in the job. So he's very much a visual type of person too. Mm-hmm. So he's, the image thing, like as you were saying, maybe a potential running mate, Kristi Noem. I mean, he very much has cultivated, himself and his messaging on that imaging. So how much do you think that has also helped this time around in this campaign too, by taking that, if it's almost like, show up, dress for the job you want, right? As opposed to going around in the bus, doing kind of the old school pound the dirt kind of thing. Yeah,
I think that even if his campaign felt he needed to do that kind of campaigning, my guess is that he would be reluctant to do it because it would look as if he was vulnerable. And I think that optics are important to every politician, but probably no one more than Donald Trump. And he wasn't weak here, and so why act like you are?
We have a lot more questions for you. We're going to let you take a quick break right now. Let's go back to our Erica Edwards as we go county by county and talk some of those numbers we're learning now. Erica?
Yeah, this is the Associated Press's estimates right now, and so this is being updated in real time. So what we are seeing, you are seeing at home, and this is minute by minute, second by second. So as of right now, total 28% of votes are counted. I don't know if you can see that, but we're going to start way out in Bamberg County to start because this is where Nikki Haley is from. So this is really interesting to see who is winning in Bamberg County, her home county. And as of right now, it says about 56% of the votes have been counted there. And as of right now, 60% of the vote is going to Donald Trump. And then we know that Nikki Haley cast her vote in Kiowa Island, where she lives. So we're taking it down to Charleston County. Let's look there. About 35% of the votes counted, also going to Donald Trump. About 36. So it's a little bit, actually, I'm sorry, I'm looking at this wrong. So this is in Charleston County. Nikki Haley has about 63% of the votes so far, but only 35% of the votes have been counted. So if we take a look at a little closer to home in Georgetown County. As of right now, Donald Trump has 55% of the vote, and about 55% of the votes have been counted there. In Horry County, only about 30% of the votes have been tallied at this point, and right now, as of 8:14, 63.8% of the vote is going to Donald Trump. So this is really interesting to see, going county by county. In Florence County, right now, 67% of the vote going to Donald Trump. So again, we are watching the votes come in, 29% total votes counted at this time. So as these numbers change, we'll keep checking in. As of right now, America Edwards in the studio, back to you.
Erica, thank you. And now let's fast forward just a bit and act as though Trump did in fact win the primary and will be going up against Joe Biden, our current president. I talked earlier about the Quinnipiac poll that showed that in fact Nikki Haley would do better against Biden and actually could possibly beat him versus Trump. So should Trump go up against Biden, do you think that he, has a shot of actually beating him this time?
I think he does. I think that if the election was held today, that President Trump would win, and President Biden has had a rough handful of weeks in terms of politics, and is a vulnerable candidate. He is. For example, I think that some of the establishment media sources that we associate with the Democratic Party have been, increasingly debating whether or not President Biden should withdraw from the race. The New York Times, for example, had a handful of op-eds this weekend alone having that conversation amongst different journalists. And, a few weeks ago, that was kind of a taboo that wasn't mentioned. And so we've moved now to conversations not if President Biden's age and concerns about his age are going to hurt him, but how much they're going to hurt him. Not if he's going to be weaker with some key groups like black voters or Latino voters, but how much weaker he's going to be with those. And not if President Biden should consider stepping down, but if the Democrats could have a better candidate replace him or one who would do even worse. And so, when we, obviously for good reason, much of our focuses tonight has been on President Trump and Governor Haley. But when we kind of consider where President Biden is in the current political moment, it's not a great place. And there's a long time between now and November, but and that's a long time for things to get better for Joe Biden. It's also a long time for things to get worse. And but I think if I was President Trump, I would not be looking at the November challenge as something that was impossible.
Yeah.
And he even said, go ahead.
For a lot of folks too, Joe Biden's 81 years old. Just doing math, another 4 years takes him to 85. So there has been quite a bit of conversation on the other side of the aisle lately about, if he, God forbid, something were to happen to him and he had to step back, or he just decided, after all, I can't do this. What would happen then? How would the next person be selected? Would it automatically be Kamala Harris, do you think? Or what's going to happen within that Democratic convention? How would all of that transpire in that hypothetical situation?
Well, so you really think it's going to happen?
I think it's realistic that it could happen, right? And it could happen for political reasons. It could happen for health reasons. But what would happen if President Biden were to make an announcement that he was, stepping down from the race, or he was stepping down from office? It depends on when it happens. If it happens in the next couple of months, that some of those states that don't vote until late spring or summer, they can have a contest with other candidates. If it happens later in the spring, when it's too late for other additional candidates to get on the ballot, then more likely the decision would be made in the Democratic National Convention.
It's interesting because after the Associated Press called this primary, just minutes after the polls closed here in South Carolina, one of the first things that Trump said after he took the podium was, I wish we didn't have to wait 9 months before we took this to a real vote. But, it may actually behoove him to wait longer.
It could. It's going to be fascinating to kind of watch how things play out over the course of the next 9 months and see, who's up, who's down, but also what kind of factors emerge, whether it's historical, the governor mentioned that tonight was a historic event. Virtually any development that could happen between now and November could be historic, right?
Oh, yeah.
If President Biden suddenly decides he's not going to run for re-election, that's a historic development, right?
So many things are happening. Have you ever recounted political season like this with so many historical things happening and,
No.
and
I mean,
just like every
this is
corner
your
you turn.
industry. You know, and we were talking
Yeah.
earlier too, because I had a political science background too from college. It's like everything that I learned has almost been turned on its head in the
Right.
past several years, because it's like the whole landscape has been changed really
Never a
since
dull
Trump
moment.
came on the scene.
Never.
Yeah.
The only thing it really reminds me of this uncertainty day to day and big things potentially happening was the recount for the 2000 election when George W. Bush ended up defeating Al Gore, and that big developments were happening every day for about a month, and they all had major consequences in affecting who was going to be president of the United States. But that was still only a month, and at least we knew what the national vote total was and who the candidates were. At this point, there's a not insignificant chance that we could see two people other than Trump or Biden running against each other in November, right?
Eyes are glued.
Yeah. Well, there's going to be a lot of work for journalists.
Yeah, we have been listening to Assistant Professor from CCU, Justin Vaughn. I appreciate you being here. I know I'll be speaking with you a little later, and we'll have some more interview questions for you if we can think of any more for the 11 o'clock news coming up
For
tonight.
everyone that's also watching too online, feel free to go ahead and get online.
Questions you have.
Send us
Absolutely.
some questions. You can send them to Eric or myself, and we're going to bring them to Justin for you. If there's anything that you want to know, we are happy to ask those questions as well.
For sure. And we are understanding that Nikki Haley is not prepared to take the podium just yet. So we have Ian Klein there in Charleston, and he is there when she does take the podium. And we will bring you results from that coming up tonight on WMBF News at 11 o'clock. We appreciate you being here for the special online coverage of WMBF News and the GOP primaries for 2024.
Yeah, and we thank you again, Justin, for joining us and for all of your expertise. It certainly does help make sense of it all.
We will see you tonight at 11 o'clock.